Right, welcome back to Morning Express here on KTN News, and thank you so much for keeping it here. And of course, it is time to look at our newspaper, our press review. Of course, some of the stories that have made the headlines and have been published in different newspapers. And of course, as usual, we're looking at the Standard newspaper. We have The Nation, and we have the Standard newspaper, and of course, Business Daily. Just look at what is also making headlines within the business sector. And of course, joining me now is Philip Magal, who's a lawyer, just to try and understand some of the stories that have been published in different newspapers. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
And always a pleasure having you here.
It's a pleasure too.
Okay, now let's start with the Standard newspaper.
Yes.
And the front page of the Standard newspaper.
Yes.
Let's have a look at that 140 allowances for civil servants to go, meaning they have to be slashed.
Yes.
But when you open the Standard newspaper, page 6 of that story, it actually gives us the breakdown. And you know, there has been concern that civil servants get a lot of allowances that even surpass their salaries to an extent that so many civil servants are actually relying on their allowances and not their salaries.
More than the salary.
Yeah, and it has also attracted people from the private sector to join the public sector just because of the huge allowances, because we have acting allowance, adversity allowance, and the most interesting allowance that caught my eye is this transfer allowance. So if you're being transferred from one workstation to another, you're supposed to have an allowance.
Of course, to facilitate the transfer. Probably you'll be moving with your family and your belongings. So it's important. It's an important bit of...
It's an important bit. So let's just have that discussion a bit, you know, in terms of these allowances. And it's going to cause a lot of uproar.
Of course it is, because like they have rightly put it, it constitutes even, in some instances, even more than the salary some people earn.
Yeah.
What we have to understand is that, you know, salaries in the public services, the basic salaries in public services have been, for a long time, remained constant and been really on the lower side compared to the private sector. It is these allowances that top it up. That
actually boost it.
Yes, and make it reasonable working for the government. I am fearful that without the allowances, then without an adjustment of the basic salaries as well, most people might be forced to leave the public service. Yeah,
because I mean, when you're being employed, within the public sector, you're not even told about the allowances, because I mean, your discussion will be on the basic. On the basic salary, so they don't tell you the allowances. The allowances are not part of it. So when you check your salary at the end of the month, you're like, wow. No, you know, at the back of your mind, you will have it. Yeah, like how you will be aware of the house allowance, health allowance, acting. You will be aware of some of the allowances. But it's not put as your basic salary. No, it's not part of your basic salary. Okay, because right now, as we speak, Kenya public wage bill currently is at 700 billion. Shillings, and growing, and it's growing, and the government hopes to, you know, actually collect 1.5 trillion in taxes this year. So clearly, slashing all these allowances, it's such a huge step. It should make for a lot of saving for the government, but then I don't think this is the best way for the government to make savings. There are many other alternatives that the government can use to make the savings, because, like I've said, unless there is a commensurate increase on the basic salary, the public service salary will scare away most people, and it will lead to brain drain from public service to the private sector. Remember, a public sector has to compete with the private sector. Of course, the wage bill is a major concern. You have to remember that, like you've said, we collect 1.5 trillion in taxes. Half of it goes to servicing our debts. Half of it goes to paying salaries. Out of 100 shillings, we are left with only 17 shillings for development. For that. It is a tough balancing act for the government. But then I don't think this will really help the government make realistic savings. And you know, this way that has been done by my colleague Moses Mishira, when you look at the second para, it says that they've, you know, in that phase, the only allowances that won't be touched is housing, hardship, leave, and subsistence allowance, you know, which have to be, they'll still be assessed. And I mean, people always wonder, why do civil servants, I mean, public servants have, you know, house allowance, leave allowance, and this and not, you know, like it's a leave allowance on top of your, your salary.
No, you don't leave is a is a requirement in any sort of employment.
Exactly.
I believe that allowance is applied both in private as well as in public sector. Most of these allowances, very few are not justified. Because if you look at the whole list that has been put here, VIP protection allowance, transfer allowance, but there are some things that really don't make sense. I don't know, like top-up allowance.
Entertainment allowance. Just being entertained, you're given...
Some officers actually need the kit here because of the kind of people they receive, kind of the activities they carry out. Like, let's say the cabinet secretaries, they need entertainment allowance in the sense that, you know, not all business is done in the office.
Magal, I tend to disagree with you because, I mean, entertainment allowance. Yes. I mean, hefty. Give your you know,
you cannot expect a cabinet secretary to go to your everyday kiosk.
Because I mean, even President Uhuru Kenyatta has been talking about, you know, slashing some of the spending within the public sector.
Yes.
You know, and that's why there was a time he said there wouldn't be tea in the offices, newspaper in the offices. Yes. This thing of traveling from one county to another for benchmarking and having conferences, and you know, even having this conference in private hotels.
Yes,
it was supposed to be a thing of the past. But
and I think that is where they should be focusing, because here we don't talk of the per diems, where we see that you know, at the end of every financial year, most of the parastatals and most ministries send their workers to foreign trips in order to exhaust their budgetary allocations. And they spend a lot out there. We've seen these at the county, at the devolved units level. We've seen it at the central government level. But some of these allowances really are not applicable to a vast majority of the employees.
And exactly, you bring a very important point, because some of these allowances, I don't think someone within the public sector, within the low job group, can be given entertainment allowance. Like, mostly it's hardship, leave allowance, and probably house allowance, transport allowance. And so, I mean, somehow it will bring a lot of harmonization within the public sector.
Yes, it needs to be assessed and harmonized, because like hardship allowance, which was there in the 70s, the areas that were classified as hardship in the 70s and the 80s are no longer hardship. So therefore, there is a cause for reassessment and a rationalization of the same.
All right. Now, still on page 6, on the right, we have that cash bill. You know, respite for petty crime suspects. And of course, this comes as a sigh of relief, because I mean, it means, you know, petty crime suspects will no longer be spending weeks, months, or years in jail. It's just a matter of appear before a police station, sort out your case, and actually, you know, get free, go free. But then it begs the question, in terms of the integrity of this process, matters corruption.
You know, just to begin with, you know, the funny bit is that this is what the Constitution provides, that for any offense that carries a sentence of less than 6 months or a punishment of a fine only, one shall not be detained in a cell. You know, that has been the constitutional provision since 2010. That it's being implemented 9 years later is a bit, you know, it's a bit funny. But that should have been the case. There is no reason why a person should be detained in the police over the weekend, whether it is a major or a minor crime, unless there is still ongoing investigation. Everyone is liable everyone should be granted bail, and that should be the general practice across the board.
And actually, you know, this implementation that was given, I mean, the Deputy Inspector General of Police, Edward Mbugwa, actually said it needs to be implemented. And this is because it is a recommendation that was given out, you know, and of course by the Bill and Bond Implementation Committee at the request of the National Council of Administration of Justice. So, I mean, are we likely to see this process being like a transparent process? But even before you answer that question, and of course we are joined by Honorable Anthony Luoch, who's actually joined us in studio this morning. Mheshimiwa, asante sana kwa kukuja asubuhi.
Thank you very much.
I know it's a very early morning for every Kenyan right now. And you know, we're having a press review this morning, and I think you have the Standard newspaper with you.
Yes.
And we were looking at that cash bail respite for petty crime suspects, owing to the fact that they no longer have to go to through the court process, and some of them, it will also prevent that whole issue of having them jailed for 6 months, 1 year, because our jails are actually full, and this is as a way of trying to actually decongest the courts, which begs the question, should we implement this, having the petty crime offenders going to the police station to actually have their cases sorted out within the police station? Will it not actually encourage cases of corruption?
I don't think so. First of all, bail bond policy really is discretion no matter to the court itself. The judge and the magistrate have discretion to try and weigh in and decide based on the nature of the offense, the gravity of the sentence that will be passed, and also the possibility of whether the person will or will not attend court. But a good thing that comes out of this really is that a lot of the people that we have going into jail are mostly people who do small crimes. And you've seen all these things about people who have mega issues of corruption, and the executive has been saying about the way we let them go on very basic things. Somebody steals billions of shillings, but you're told pay X amount of money. So I think, one, the congestion of the court, and secondly, also to be able to get a system where you make it commensurate between the crime and the offense.
So why has it taken long for this to be implemented?
One, I think the circumstances of the case, you've mentioned the fact that our jails themselves are congested.
Yeah.
You need to be able to find other offenses, for example, where you could do extramural penal offenses, get somebody to do manual work, do out of jail kind of sentences instead of getting them to the prisons.
All right. And Magal, there's a part of that story that says when a suspect issued with a cash bill, the law states that it should be remitted to the court or refunded to the suspect in a timely and expeditious manner.
Yes. Basically, like you stated earlier on, there's been a lot of abuse of this, the use of the cash bail at the police station. Now, the first reprieve to these suspects of minor or petty offenses is that they will be granted free bond or free personal bond, meaning therefore they don't have to give out any money. What has usually happened at the police station is that you would give about 5,000, 3,000 would be recorded, 2,000 would disappear somewhere there. Yes, and again, like you've just pointed out, you are supposed to be given back this money once you are arraigned in court. But that again has been a conduit of corruption. Because immediately you are given that money, you are supposed to return some of it back to the police. And that has been prone to abuse. Now that these people are guaranteed free bond, we expect corruption to go down at the police station.
All right. Yes. Now, gentlemen, let's have a look at page 7, or still of the Standard newspaper, and that is the National Assembly to actually, soon they'll be vetting President Uhuru Kenyatta's nominee for the post of Inspector General of Police. And we know Hillary Mutiambai was nominated. But then, let me just begin with, Madari Member of Parliament, Honorable Anthony Olwuoch. The vetting process within Parliament has been questionable, and this came out very clearly during the vetting process of the new Cabinet Secretary for Education, and members of the public were like, it looked like the CS was the one who was actually vetting the members of Parliament. So what process should we look out for, and this time round when this nominee appears before the National Assembly Committee?
Well, I think Chapter 6 is one of those parts of the Constitution that is ignored. And I think other than competence, and Professor Magoha was obviously more than qualified. I don't know whether he intimidated members of that committee. I'm told a good friend of mine, a Nairobi Member of Parliament, and the ex-student leader went there and was actually cheering. For obvious reasons, I think when I spoke to him, for obvious reasons that he worked with Professor Magoha for some time. But I think there are rules now that the Speaker has tried to bring, so that other than the Chapter 6 of the Constitution in terms of integrity, in terms of the leadership qualities that they bring, in terms of their background on corruption, I think there are rules that the Speaker has designed so that members of Parliament also have an arm's length approach to these people. We don't have a situation where people go there and other than the vetting, there are other interests that accompany this, and there have been cases before where the speaker has complained. People taking selfies after that and going out of their way to try and shake the hands of the nominee.
Which remind me during Professor George Magoha's vetting.
Yes,
It was so interesting that a honorable member of parliament said, you know, we come from the same village instead of handling serious matters.
Yes. I think there needs to be pre-vetting sessions so that people go there and agree. First of all, you don't have to ask a question if you don't have one. You don't have to comment if you don't have any comment, because again, now if we trivialize the process of vetting, then people lose interest into the integrity and the probity of the vetting process. So I think we need to be able to stick to the constitutional threshold of an office holder. This is a state officer. A state officer needs to be able to meet certain standards other than the academic qualifications.
All right. And Magal, is there need for actually vetting some of these nominees? Because, I mean, Parliament has always been termed as a house of rubber stamp. You've never seen any nominee being rejected.
It is worrying because our houses of Parliament act more or less like a rubber stamp. Nobody has ever been, no appointment has been, except one for the appointment to the, I think, SRC. That is where the only instance where we saw a nominee being turned down, that is because they had been adversely mentioned in a corruption matter after the fight instigated by the president against corruption. They should be there, they should come prepared, they should ask probing questions in order to highlight the qualifications of the nominees, in order to bring out issues of concern as touches the integrity of the nominees. We saw some people pointing out when Professor Magoha was being
vetted.
Yes, in Parliament, that some people were able to get appointments with only a birth certificate.
Yeah.
And that was after they had been vetted by the Houses of Parliament. So, it is a high time the National Assembly stepped up to its role and did the vetting process and made it count.
Okay.
So as to add value to these appointments.
To these appointments.
Yes.
So lastly, as we bring this conversation to an end about the nominee, the vetting that's supposed to take place, Honorable Oluoch, I mean, what are we expecting, when this vetting process begins? Because, I mean, the IG comes in at a time when a lot is expected from him.
I think, first of all, it's good to take stock of the former IG, the things that he managed to achieve, what he didn't achieve. If I begin with perhaps what he didn't achieve, I think if you look at the history of the last 1 or 2 years, the issues about police reforms, to what extent did he aid the idea of police reforms? The issues about welfare of the police, I think that's an issue he needs to be able to look for. There are questions of extrajudicial killings. We now get into a process where we are also finding about people getting into jail when they didn't. So you're looking at the question of prosecutions. What is the quality of the investigators that we have? We're in a process where now the DCI, the question of investigations on corruption and other things, to what extent are they going to work together with the DCI to try and also on the question of prevention of crimes, because intelligence, that's one of the things I've been asking myself. To what extent do we invest in intelligence so that the police and the DCI work together so that we're not dealing with questions of cases of crimes already committed, but preventions of crime? How much money that goes into corruption have we tried to prevent from taking place? So I think these, together with the abuse of police powers, are things that the IG needs to be put to task on.
Okay. Now, the last story on the Standard newspaper, then we cruise over to the Nation newspaper. Still on page 7, we have the ex-county boss's account frozen. And it is so surprising because this is a former CEC, that is page 7 of the Standard newspaper. If you can have a look at it. I mean, making a lot of money. This is a CEC who's made over 100 million and has really done serious investment within his term in office. And, which begs the question, when it comes to matters corruption within the county, the county governments in terms of the CECs that are being appointed. And I don't even think, Honorable Anthony Oluoch or you, Magal, this is your salary. You have to work so hard.
Yeah,
I don't know for how many years.
Money.
Yeah, for you to earn such kind of money. Yes. What does it really say about, you know, utilization of public funds within the county governments?
You know, this is the scenario throughout the 47 counties. If you visited these counties before 2013 and you visit them today, you will see skyscrapers, even in areas you'd never imagine there would be skyscrapers. I think ESCC really let Kenyans down in the last 5 years. This is something that could have been prevented. So far, we should be seeing prosecution of so many people at the county levels, including governors. But then what do we see? I can tell you that this Mr. Kuria is not the only one. If you, I'm sure if you investigate his colleagues in that particular county, almost all of them probably do have as much, because you cannot steal this much alone.
Yeah, because it's being said he embezzled 115 million and acquired properties worth 181 million within 3 years.
And this is what Mheshimiwa alluded to earlier on. You know, we should have such people going to jail. We shouldn't have cases where these people are being given fines, because you can imagine with 181 million, if properly invested, you can be able to pay the 181 million and still live large.
All right.
At public's expense.
All right, Honorable Oluoch.
I think it's a tragedy about an indictment of our counties, because really counties were supposed to be a case study of how we wanted to move resources and power from central government to the counties, and therefore help fast-track development. But if you see all the stories and headlines we see about, and this is just one of those cases, like he said, there are many cases of counties. And the question really that we need to be asking is, what are the systems in place to ensure that the money that we give does not end up, 70% of it paying salaries, and then I don't know, the other percentage that remains goes into embezzlement. So really I think it's a case of how our counties have failed us and how we have turned county government and resources into cash cows for corruption.
Oh, cash cows for corruption. Yeah. And it's good that we're having also this conversation with you. Let's, I'll share with you this newspaper, Honorable Oluoch, that is the Nation newspaper. And we are looking at the front page, which talks about illegal pay shock for civil servants, and that story is actually, more details on that story is on page 4 and 5. And it is a discussion that we were having earlier on. You can share my newspaper with Honorable Oluoch. We were having earlier on with Magal about the 440 allowances for civil servants to go down. They'll be slashed by this members of the Salaries and Remuneration Commission, the new team that took over from the SRC-led commission. And I mean, if you look at some of the allowances that are there, because of course the Standard newspaper also gives a very good breakdown of some of the allowances that are going to be slashed. And it is that it's going to cause a lot of uproar within the public sector, because so many people have been taking advantage of these allowances that have been put, and they take advantage in the sense that some of them would want to travel, so they get travel allowance, and some of them would want to have, you know, transfers to have hardship allowances. So what is your take? Do you really support this slashing of these allowances?
I think Salaries and Remuneration Commission, first of all, I think we have to look at the mandate, and one of the things they are there to do is to rationalize our expenditure, especially to what extent are we using our public funds prudently. If you look at chapter of the Constitution, I think between Article 201 to 215, it talks about prudent use of our finances, and also the sharing equally of the tax burden. Allowances really not just for civil servants alone. Even in counties, if you see a lot of impeachment processes and impeachment threats that are being put on governors and speakers, it's really about people, civil servants, public servants, county officials wanting to go for trips really for benchmarking things that are non-existent, people going to countries to go to find out things that they could really be able to get people to train them within here. So if they were going to touch on salaries, that would be a different thing. But if they're touching on allowances, especially if these allowances are abused for trips either that are not necessary or exaggerated. And I think that's where the loophole, I'm really trying to understand where this is going. I'm thinking that there is a loophole where people use allowances to try and make money really that they don't
deserve. That is the same thing. Actually, you said exactly what SRC argues, because SRC says some of the senior civil servants, you know, are actually abusing these allowances, and it's made people get attracted to the public service. But which begs the question, I mean, you're a honorable member of parliament representing your constituents in Mathare, and there has been concern by Kenyans to have some of the allowances of members of parliament slashed, like sitting allowance. You know, when you go in for a committee meeting, you have that sitting allowance. When you appear in parliament, you have that sitting allowance. Then you also have, you know, you have other small allowances that when added, Kenyans say, if you're slashing these allowances, why can't you also touch on our representatives within parliament?
That was already done. That was already done. I think the first thing Salaries and Remuneration Commission did was to slash by 50% allowances by members of parliament. They also went ahead and capped the number of sittings. Previously, I think there were no caps or limits on the number of sittings. Now you're capped in 1 month. You can only do maybe for one committee no more than 5 or 6 sittings. And even when we sit in our plenaries, the NINI was already slashed. But having said that, if you look at, I believe, Article 127, there's a need so that there is not an overlap between the role of SRC and Parliament. Parliamentary Service Commission exists so that it can look at the welfare, well-being, including things like allowances. They belong to the purview of the Parliamentary Service Commission. So having capped that, I don't think Salaries and Remuneration Commission has the mandate to go into how much, to the extent that perhaps at one point they will probably say you need to do sittings without an allowances at all.
But do you really need do members of parliament need sittings with allowances?
That is the question that Kenyans have been asking. I mean, they receive, what is the salary?
Yeah, because like I'm sitting here right now, Mheshimiwa, and it's not like I'm going, at the end of the show, I'm going to get a sitting allowance. I mean, just because you are elected to represent the people, which is the mandate of a honorable member of parliament. I mean, so it's a question that Kenyans have been asking.
Yes, and Kenyans have really been complaining about this because they are, you know, in other countries or traditionally, the case has been that the representation in parliament is a honorary seat, which does not attract salaries. But we are told that Kenyan members of parliament are the best paid, amongst the best paid in the world. But then we have nothing to show for it. We have rampant corruption. You know, we've just been talking about the rubber stamping role when it comes to vetting. They are not passing, they are not properly scrutinizing laws which they are passing. So we are really asking as Kenyans, do we get value for money? And can they really justify their hefty salaries?
All right.
Yes.
Now let's have a look at the Star newspaper, page 4. Star newspaper, page 4. I'll just share this with you again. The Star newspaper, page 4, and it is how, and of course it's good that we also have Anthony Luochu, the Member of Parliament of Mathare, just also to clarify for us whether that's, you know, what's being reported is true, that MCAs, MPs are getting kickbacks of 10% when it comes to CDF funds in terms of when you're giving a project, you know, and probably a project to build school, or in terms of transport, or in terms of road, you ask for kickback of like 10%. So that's how the governors, MCAs, and members of parliament are actually enriching themselves.
Well, I mean, it's good not to generalize. I mean, you had a case of somebody we just read in the Standard newspaper, a CEC. It's good to say, for example, ex-member of parliament, ex-contractor.
Instead of saying members of parliament.
Yes, you know, it's a very good punching bag to always use members of parliament. And if you want to make a headline, talk about members of parliament wanting to increase their salaries, wanting to increase their allowances and stuff like that. So it's a good headline to make without making specifics. It would be very helpful because really this is criminal. We have EACC, we have DCI, we have all these people. It would be good to say, for example, like we've talked about, a specific CEC yeah, who has amassed 100 and something million, traceable to certain transaction, contracts, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So if this is based on some research or some investigations, it would come out, because let me tell you, every quarter and every so often we have the Public Accounts Committee auditing and presenting accounts and audits of constituencies. Things like this ought to come out of an audit question rather than generalizations. And if there is a complaint, those should come through EACC. I am a contractor. I was asked to do 10%, and this is the Member of Parliament.
Which, as you're speaking right now, what
and that is not to say that these things don't happen.
They do happen.
Probably do happen. It would be helpful that they're not generalizations.
And it's good you say that they do happen, Honorable Watch, because, Magal, as the media have been reporting on cases where schools are so dilapidated, they don't have there's no good sanitation, classes are just run down, and then there you are, you see the head teacher of that school saying, tunaomba, tusaidiwe, and yet you're wondering, don't you have like a representative who is given CDF?
You could see the other day, Sonko had to travel all the way to the northern counties to distribute food. Yes, those people have MPs. As much as Mheshimiwa wouldn't like us to generalize, but then that is the general picture we get from the ground. Remember, CDF committees are staffed by the members of parliament. If you look at most of them, the people there are not professionals. They are cronies, brothers, sisters to the members of parliament. These are people who cannot be expected to act transparently and be accountable. How do they utilize these funds? If you go to my constituency, they are buying buses for schools. I mean, we have schools with even 4 or 5 buses. What are these buses for? These funds are being misused. They are not being put into our projects that would give us returns. And the main reason they are being used in a certain way is because there is an arrangement. And let us not, parry over this matter. Let us not try to lie to the public. It is because there is an arrangement whereby if you buy a bus for, let's say, the price is set at 7 million, a bus goes for 5 million, but then that's something that cannot be questioned by the auditors. The 2 million comes back to the Member of Parliament, and that is how, for a long time, we are going to stagnate as a nation instead of moving forward.
And Honorable Lucha, as we bring that conversation to an end, because we need to take a short break, then we come back with the State of the Nation discussion. How, as a Member of Parliament, of course, you handle CDF funds. What priorities do you look at when it comes to utilization of CDF within your constituency?
Well, first of all, I don't think members of parliament handle CDF funds. I think you remember...
But you actually oversee?
Yes, we patronize to the extent that the priorities themselves, a member of parliament perhaps would be able to have input. If, for example, there's a situation where we have one school having 4 or 5 buses, like you're saying, that's complete loss
misuse.
Of not even misuse. I mean, where are the priorities here? If a school has dilapidated classes, dilapidated toilets, dilapidated facilities, no laboratories, I don't think any member of parliament would preside over.
But as a member of parliament of Mathare constituency, what do you look at when it comes to, utilization of the CDF fund? Because it begs the question, like, what priorities do you put in place? Do you start, okay, now let's do classes, or let's buy a school bus, or let's ensure that these school children are going to school in terms of bursary? What do you look at exactly?
I think for me it's because, one, we are allowed to do only education and security things. If I look at education, I think, number one, I would look at, like, now the government is talking about 100% transition. I would be able to ask myself the question, how many children would be transiting from class 8 to Form 1? How many classes do we have? How many desks do we have? In terms of facility, that becomes a priority, so that there is proper infrastructure for children to be able to sit in a proper, decent class. And then, of course, the staffing issue becomes another facility. And thirdly, for me, would be the issue about laboratory and access to things like those.
All right, thank you so much, Anthony Lwach, Member of Parliament for Mathare and lawyer. Philip Magal, just having a look at the story that made the headlines actually in different newspapers. Now, it's time for me to take a short break here on Morning Express KTN News. But when we come back, we shall be talking about State of the Nation. And this morning, of course, we will be coming back with Honorable Anthony Lwach and Philip Magal, a lawyer. And this morning, we shall be talking about the State of the Nation, the relationship between President Uhuru Kenyatta, his deputy William Ruto, and of course, ODM leader Raila Odinga. The foot soldiers of both political parties, Jubilee and ODM, have raised serious concern. And this week we saw even some members of parliament allied to Ruto saying that, ODM leader Raila Odinga wants to take over the job of the deputy president. So all that after the short commercial break that we're taking right now here on KTN News Morning Express. So keep it KTN News.